So good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are located, and welcome to this live IntelliCorp webinar titled How to Enable a Smart DevOps Approach to SAP Application Change. Now, if you've been following our blog series for the past 6 weeks or so, then you'll know that we've covered the key 6 DevOps lifecycle stages. So from plan, design and build to test, deploy and support. Today on the call, we're going to go through build, test and deploy and show you how our smart software really helps you in those areas. So my name is Emma Dowie. I'm our marketing manager at IntelliCorp. And with me on the call is Chris Truman, our CTO. He's going to be demoing the software today. So just a couple of things before we get started. All the lines are muted, so everyone's on mute, so if you have any questions then please submit them in the chat panel. We have a couple of minutes at the end to answer some, so we'll try and get through as many as possible. If we don't get to your question, then we will follow up afterwards via email. And if there are any other questions afterwards, then please let us know. We'll also record the session as well, and we'll send out the recording afterwards too. So I think we're about ready, Chris, so I'll let you get on.
Thanks very much, Emma, and hello everyone. I thought we'd start with a hole in the ground. I took this picture in London a couple of years ago. There's obviously some major engineering work going on around the Tottenham Court Road area. And as someone who basically spends their entire day making software, I'm always fascinated by hardware, particularly hardware at a scale that we can interact with as humans. I mean, the digital hardware that we run our software on has become so microscopic that it really is difficult to get a feel for it. But as I was up on the sort of 18th floor of this tower block looking down at all of the work that was going on, I was reminded that the fact is software is still the most complex thing that human beings make. And indeed, looking at this great big hole in the ground, I thought, well, if only changing software was as easy as this. Okay, so what does it mean to change our SAP applications? I think it's an important question to answer, and we'll frame what we're really trying to do by positioning our products to support a smart DevOps approach. Well, of course, first it starts with an idea. In my mind, there are really only 2 types of idea. There are those that we believe will increase revenue, and there are those that we believe will reduce cost. And our objective as the IT organization is to take those ideas and turn them into working software that's running in production. And as an IT organization, 2 of the things that we're probably most concerned with is time to market and cost to market. How quickly can we turn those ideas into working software in production, and how much is it going to cost us? So if we bear that in mind, then let's also consider the landscape in which change is being introduced. There's been quite an evolution of the SAP landscape. I would think this is fairly common across all organizations, especially those that we work with, where perhaps the initial SAP R3 implementation was being driven by Y2K concerns, maybe only really operating in the finance area. But over time, as SAP have delivered more functionality, either homegrown or through acquisition, we've deployed that across our enterprise. And to steal a quote from sort of Dirk Gently, we're faced with the fundamental interconnectedness now of all things. We may well be running an ECC6 based software suite and starting to think about our journey to HANA, whether that's Suite on HANA, largely a technical database migration, or an S4HANA where we're really looking to transform our business processes. So we've got time to market, cost to market, we've got this highly evolved SAP landscape, and then of course there's the custom dimension. The data on the slide actually comes from a customer that presented at last year's SAP TechEd event, where they talked about having 25,000 custom objects, or give or take, amounting to more than 10 million lines of custom code. So when we consider what it takes to make changes to our SAP applications, it's not just, oh, let's upgrade to the latest support pack and we can take all of the SAP testing work. We've got to consider the impact on all of our customizations as well. So we've really got all these 3 dimensions that we're trying to manage when it comes to changing our SAP applications. And so of course the question we ask ourselves is, what's the best way to implement our ideas? And for that, a good place to start is with the methodology. So I pilfered this from Wikipedia, in preparing the material for today's session. And what I was struck with is that most of the methodologies that we've developed have largely been designed with the first three phases of taking ideas and turning them into working software in production. It's really about how do I interact with my customer, in our case the business, understand what their ideas are, their requirements, how do I come up with some kind of design, and how do I then turn that into software that at least works on my machine as a developer. I think in recent years what we've seen is the emergence of DevOps, which I'll give you my somewhat sarcastic programmer's perspective. You know, I've got a piece of software now, it's working on my machine, so let's just run that in production. No, of course, I don't propose that we do that. It's not about programming just taking over the world. But what DevOps gives us is an insight into more than just plan, design, and build. It takes us through test, deploy, and support. It really supports the process of taking ideas and turning them into working software in production. If we consider the DevOps mantra, then what you'll see is it's all about automation. We want to automate as many of the activities that go on through plan, design, build, test, deploy, and support as possible so that they can become as efficient as possible and very reliable. We want to make it easy for us to transform what we've built through test and then on into our production environments without having objects or changes get left behind or things get overwritten because of the different streams that we have in our SAP landscapes. And this is what really gives rise to what we're positioning as smart DevOps. There is an enormous amount of data in our SAP applications that tell us how they're used, how they've been configured, how they've been customized. The data that's there when we start to change our SAP applications, if there were a way for us to analyze it, then we can come up with smarter decisions about what we build, how we build it, smarter decisions about what we test, why we test, what's even testable, and supporting our deployment team and then on through into support. So IntelliCorp is positioning its three products, Live Compare, Live Model, and Live Interface, at the heart of this smart DevOps approach, where we really embody in those three products the DevOps mantra of automate, automate, automate. As Emma said, in the rest of the session, we're going to focus on three areas. We're going to look at build, test, and deploy. And it will be, rest assured, very demo heavy. Why focus on build? Because it's cheaper to fix problems there than it is to wait for them to show up in production. I took this 30 times cheaper metric from an HPE presentation at a Discover show in Barcelona from a couple of years back. Whether we agree it's 30 times cheaper or 10 times cheaper, I'm sure everyone will say yes. The earlier in the development cycle we can find problems, the cheaper it is to fix them. As you'll see in a minute, we've surveyed our customers to understand their use of our products to support testing, or more importantly, to help them focus their testing efforts. And what we see when we survey our customers is 100% test coverage for just 15% of the effort. So incredible value that can come from using smart technology to analyze the changes we're introducing into our SAP systems in order to deliver better quality. And deployment is a crucial step, of course, because it's that final point before we take all of the changes and promote them into production. And it's our last chance to eliminate issues that can create production outages and help us achieve zero production defects. The three apps that I want to focus on inside of the Live Compare product are CodeWatch, which will be used to support the development team during build, Impact, that helps all of our testing organization, and Release Assurance, which is for the deployment team. Very briefly to introduce CodeWatch before I get to the demo, I typed Agile Project Failure into Google in preparing these materials, and I guess it stopped at 500,000 hits. Obviously they know I'm based in the UK, so this was one of the leading headlines. The UK wasting £37 billion a year on failed Agile IT projects. Of course, the first thing that went through my mind was, well, £37 billion would buy you an awful lot of IntelliCorp product. But if you dig behind the headlines and look at the research that's been done on why has Agile not been successful, it's largely because too much complexity is accumulated in the system. You'll often see people's comments on, well, we ended up with so much complexity, we didn't even know how it worked today, let alone what we would do to change it to support tomorrow. Historically, when we weren't trying to deliver change at an incredible pace, we might have done things like code reviews to ensure that the foundation and the changes we were making in our code were solid and would support not just today's modifications, but tomorrow's. But often many of those things have sort of been removed from the development process in order to accelerate the pace of delivery. So what we really need is a way to get the benefits of code reviews, but not have it cost us anything in terms of effort and time. And that's where LiveCompare's CodeWatch app comes into play. So let me quit the slides and show you a demo. All right, so I've logged into LiveCompare as what we call a consumer user. Anyone that's carrying a smartphone around with them today will probably recognize the style of interface where inside of LiveCompare we have an app that's designed to support one of those 6 phases of the smart DevOps process. As someone that's involved in build, I have access to the CodeWatch app. What you'll see as we go through the demos of CodeWatch and Impact and Release Assurance is that all of the apps have a unified user interface. The reason for doing that is to reduce the cost of implementation. Right? Once you know one app, you really can use them all. Over on the left-hand side is where I would set up the different configurations for my apps. So I've set up one here to look at various aspects of my ABAP code. And the first step is to choose the set of rules that I want to run against my code. So think of CodeWatch as the robot that's going to perform code reviews. And we've developed a set of scenarios to support different changes that may be going on within your SAP lifecycle. So today I'm going to look at the run and optimize. So this is, think of it as a custom release. We just want to run and maintain what we've got. But if we were doing something like a support pack or an enhancement pack, then I could switch and choose the technical upgrade rule set and run slightly different sets of analyses. Or if we were contemplating an SAP HANA migration, then I would choose the upgrade rule set, which as you can see includes a category for detecting things that if we're using them in our custom code, they just won't run on a HANA-backed infrastructure. So an obvious one there would be calls out to native SQL. So we've got lots of rules. If we expand the run and optimize, just to give you a sense of it, I've mentioned complexity. That's often the thing that's viewed as why people give up on Agile, because they just accumulate so much of it. But we've got an objective assessment of just how complex our custom code is. We can look at helping development teams ensure that everything they build sort of has that single responsibility. You know, if we're using object-oriented development in our ABAP, we don't want to be building classes that basically do everything under the sun. We want classes that implement a single responsibility. Similarly with our programs and functions. If we scroll down, we're also able to assess likely performance characteristics of our custom code. Again, this is all happening during the build phase, very early in the development cycle. My experience is that development systems, just in terms of their database, are orders of magnitude smaller than what we have in production. There's a cost associated with maintaining that production-grade infrastructure. So we have much smaller environments in development. And as a result, the ABAP code that we write that interacts with the data is likely to run very fast. And it's only as we go through QA, and most likely when we get to production, that we're going to start hitting those performance limitations. Because now we're dealing with data sets that are orders of magnitude larger. So again, LiveCompare has all of these rules which are going to be run automatically, so they're not going to take time away from the development team in order to find those issues early in the development cycle. Okay, so that's probably enough about the rules. Actually, I should say one last thing is that the system is extensible. So if you have a set of coding standards that you want to enforce in your custom development, whether that's in-house or with a systems integrator partner, then you can use the rule system that's implemented inside of LiveCompare to codify those rules, okay, and then have that run automatically. Okay, so let's go back and just look at some of the other inputs. My scenario here is it's a custom release, so my analysis system would be a development environment. And then it comes down to, well, how do I tell LiveCompare what objects I want it to go and scan? If you've got a regular release frequency, maybe you're doing drops on a monthly, weekly, or even daily basis, you could actually have LiveCompare set up so that it wakes up at midnight, examines the analysis system or development, sees which new transports have been released, and then automatically interrogates those to find the objects that have changed, find all those that have code, and then run its analysis. If you're doing something more around an organized release, you might key in the set of transports. Or if you're using a change management system, here I'm showing an example of integrating with SAP Solution Manager. Instead of pushing in the transports, we type in the change requests, and LiveCompare would then interrogate our Solution Manager system, look up all of the change requests, and from there it would find the transports and then the objects. Other ways that I can specify what I want to run, maybe there's just a certain set of objects I want to look at. In this case, what I've set up is a development class. This development class actually contains all of our unit tests for the CodeWatch application rules. So this is a great way of using LiveCompare to basically test itself. I just can key in the development class, and I know which program should fail certain rules, and then we know whether the product's working the way it should. But it's a good way to demonstrate the capabilities. And if we were being particularly interesting, we might focus on certain developers. Okay. Lastly, the thing I think that I see very often used in LiveCompare is this idea to distribute the results. I often think that there's this sort of pyramid of users of IntelliCorp products. The vast majority of the users never in fact log into LiveCompare. What they work with, as we'll see in a minute, are the information reports that the product produces. I think the nice thing about that is it means, it's not another piece of software that anyone has to learn. Instead, they're handed a report that helps them perform their job more efficiently and more effectively. The next level of users are the consumers, and I'm sharing that experience with you now. And while we won't show it on this session, rest assured that behind the scenes are all of the features and functions that you need to actually adjust all of these apps and indeed even build your own. Okay, so I've already run that variant, so let's jump in and take a look at the results. We can see that all of the results are on the right side of the screen. Again, that will be common across all of the apps. In general, every application presents its results in the same way. We start with a high-level dashboard that summarizes the results of the analysis, and if I scroll down, we'll then provide one or more links to additional resources, typically in Excel format or in HTML format. What we recognize is that, again, there may well be hundreds of people in an organization that just want access to the information, and Excel is a very common form for distributing and sharing those results. If I go back to the quality scorecard, I'm a bit of a Clint Eastwood fan. I like the sort of symbology of good, the bad, and the ugly, spaghetti western, spaghetti code, and ideally what I want to see is no red on this chart. Now, as I said, what I've done is I've analyzed all of our unit tests for this. I'm expecting there to be red. I mean, we've deliberately written bad code, if you like, in order to fail a number of the rules. But it gives you a sense of the different categories that are available in the run and optimize scenario. So I mentioned the performance, the complexity, this constant trade-off that we face between reuse and avoiding tightly coupled systems between fan in and fan out. If we have a look at the details, again, in our efforts to make it self-contained, we replicate the dashboard. In fact, there's now no reason for me to go back to that LiveCompare interface. So if all I was handed was the Excel spreadsheet, I have all of the information I need. We provide some illustrations on how we compute or compare the different kinds of categories. And we're starting to get now into the more information-dense worksheet, so bear with me as I go through that. We've got the quality scorecard, which shows for me all of the objects over here on the left-hand side. So using the standard Excel filters, I could say, well, I'm only interested in programs. And anything that's not 100% means it failed some rules. So ideally, you want to see 100% across the board. That means every program satisfied every rule that it was scanned for. Okay, maybe we only want to focus in on our bad and ugly programs, so I can start to see those. This complexity count really defines thresholds that tell me whether code will light up as good, as bad, or as ugly. And the thresholds that we've implemented in LiveCompare come from a white paper that SAP published a few years ago called Developing Modern Applications. Of course, you're free to change the thresholds if you operate in a more complex business model. You might want to permit certain levels of higher complexity in the custom code. Alternatively, you might want to lower the numbers so that you can really maintain an effort to keep that complexity out of your environments. Okay, so that covers the scorecard. Getting into a little bit more detail now, what we can do is look at the rule break summary. So again, I'll just choose programs. And we generally have two classes of rule. Errors are things that, based on our own ABAP development experience, the white papers from SAP, partnering with SAP customers, errors are things that we really should fix, and warnings are the sort of nice to fix things. So let's just look at the errors. Okay. And now I can start to see the rules that have actually failed in those programs, and sometimes many rules will fail in a single program. We've got the number of detections over there. The lowest level of detail is go in and actually look at the source code and the individual lines that cause those rules to fail, and that's on the rule break detail sheet. So again, I'll just choose program. It's easier to do it that way. And if I scroll right across, we can see that Live Compare has extracted the source code. This piece of source code has failed the rule, and that's what's written into the report. Again, completely self-contained. There's no reason for me to have to go back into Live Compare in order to do further analysis. I can take this and work with the other members of my development team to stay on top of the technical debt that we're accumulating in our system. Okay. That's CodeWatch. As I say, there are different ways of setting up and running it. We saw that we can point it at a set of transports or Solution Manager change documents or individual objects, or in this case, a development class. But certainly if you've got a regular release frequency set up within your development workflow, then consider having Live Compare actually schedule its CodeWatch analysis based on those transports that are being released from development. And that way you never have to log into Live Compare to run the analysis. It just happens automatically, and through the distribution of results, it's pushed to the team and other stakeholders, again, automatically. You're going to hear me say that word a lot, given that it's the DevOps mantra. All right. In terms of real customers that are benefiting from this, here's a global media company that have been using Live Compare for some time, and what they've observed through the application of these apps, CodeWatch, Impact, and Release Assurance, is a significant reduction in the effort that it takes for their projects. And for them, a project is all about turning a set of ideas into working software running in production. Being able to deliver those ideas satisfied in production back to the business earlier than has traditionally been possible is a huge win for the IT organization. And of course, every CFO on the planet would love to see significant reduction in costs. All right, let's look at the second of the areas, and that's test. We're going to use another of Live Compare's apps. It's called Impact, and it's really designed to answer the key questions that the testing group have about change that's being introduced into our SAP system. What should we test? Why should we test? And is it even testable? To sort of give a schematic of what we're talking about in terms of this analysis, consider that we're dealing with largely an ECC environment for the moment. I'll talk about special flavors of this impact analysis for different SAP applications in a bit. But just for the sake of argument, when I talk about a used object, let's just think of it as being a T-code. I recognize that other applications, it's not T-codes we should be performing impact analysis in, and rest assured, Live Compare does the right thing for those apps. But just to keep things simple, most companies are running in the order of magnitude thousands of used objects, thousands of used transactions. Those transactions sit on top of tens of millions of implementation objects. Okay, and when we introduce change, if it's a custom release, we might be making changes to tens or a few hundred of objects. If we're talking about accumulation of years of support packs that we're behind on, or enhancement packs, we could be changing hundreds of thousands all the way through to millions of objects. So trying to determine what's impacted is, I would argue, it's impractical to do it by hand. And that's again where smart technology can be applied to perform this function automatically. So Live Compare's Impact app will take what we use, it will discover all of the implementation objects, we tell it what's changing either in the form of a set of transports or a set of charm change requests, and then it will go through and analyze all of that data and tell us what we should test, why we should test it, and if we integrate Live Compare with, let's say, Microsoft Focus ALM or Microsoft's Visual Studio Team Services, then it can also answer the questions, what's testable and what's not. What that means in practice, I sort of gave a hint of this when I introduced the 3 apps that we'd be looking at, is when we've surveyed our customers that were going through various SAP support pack upgrades, where Live Compare is used to identify what's used, what's impacted, and then uniquely the most at-risk objects that we need to test, we see 100% test coverage for just 15% of the effort. Okay? As you can see on this chart, this analysis works for both standard SAP components and also all of our custom components, and that would include third-party add-ons that we may have installed in our system. So let's take a look at how impact works. Well, I said most people don't necessarily have to log into Live Compare, so this is just an example of getting access to a Live Compare report where it's been pushed to me. So once I integrate Live Compare with our email system, then every time an analysis is run, email like this are pushed out to, in this case it's come to just me, but of course we could put in a team email address. Thing to focus on here is not the specific numbers in any of the charts, but just what information is shown in them, because this is what you will see when you come to run impact against your SAP environments, whether it be a custom release or a support pack or an enhancement pack. You're going to get the specific used, impacted, most at risk analysis for your organization. So whether you're using thousands of objects or hundreds of objects, whether you've got 5% custom code or 60% custom code, that chart will obviously reflect this. If we integrate Live Compare with the ALM environment, then Live Compare can actually go out and take those most at-risk objects and discover if they're testable. In order to do that, SAP, IntelliCorp Live Compare, and whichever ALM platform you're using have to speak that common vocabulary. Again, I'm simplifying it a little bit where I say it's the T code. So if Live Compare is lit up that VAL1 should be tested, obviously SAP understands VAL1, Live Compare understands VAL1, and Live Compare seeks to find VAL1 in any and all of your test assets. You don't have to be specific when it comes to documenting where in the test that VAL1 is referenced. It just needs to be in there somewhere. Of course, if we're dealing with other SAP application flavors, then we would look to see the relevant object reference in our tests. So it might be a BW report, it might be a web application. But just to keep the discussion simplified for the moment, we're considering transaction codes. Okay, if I scroll down, I get a view, sort of a little bit more business-oriented, the various modules that are impacted by the change. And this is in fact where you can then use Live Model, one of the other IntelliCorp products, to really paint a much richer picture of the impact on our business processes. So if you're working with the business process owners and we're doing this impact analysis, really describing in quite rich detail exactly how the business processes that they're responsible for are affected by change, for that we use Live Model. So let me just show you that for a second. Okay, so I've got a standard reference model for SAP loaded into Live Model, and it looks a little bit plain at this point, but what I can do is enable these annotations, which are all based on data that have been loaded from Live Compare. Now I appreciate that it looks a little bit busy, but if I just draw your attention to this mini-map, that's generally what I focus on. Because we're so high, we're looking at across the entire set of business processes that SAP supports. I've loaded 3 annotations into the model. They're the blue circle, the red shape, and the green shape. Blue means it's something that we use. Okay, so that means that there's some transaction code that we're using to support some aspect of our business process. Red represents that it's impacted, meaning we've used the Live Compare Impact app. It's determined that based on the change we're introducing, it's impacted. And then green reflects the results of scanning our ALM repository. It tells us what's testable and what's not. As a business process owner, the thing that I should be concerned with, I guess, are any red areas that are poking through. Now, I should stress that I've set the demo data up here in order to have little red areas poking through, but then I can use Live Model to actually drill down all the way, if I want to, back to the transaction codes that support that. I'm not going to demo live model in any more detail, but certainly it's used to support the planning and the design phase. It has built-in capabilities to reverse engineer live SAP systems so that you're not just looking at the standard transaction codes, but also all of your custom transaction codes loaded into the appropriate place within the process model. Okay, but if you want a richer presentation of the business process impact, then live model's the product for that. Okay, like we saw with CodeWatch, the details are presented in a self-contained Excel spreadsheet where we replicate the dashboard and provide help. So again, you don't have to go find the login link or get access to the online help for Live Compare. You can just work with the self-contained report. Again, we start to get quite information dense, but as you move from left to right, generally you're going from high-level information in the Excel spreadsheet to more and more detail. So this basically summarizes what we saw in that top left chart, the used, the impacted, and also the most at risk. So if I'm interested in just focusing in on my most at risk custom, then we can see that one that was identified by Live Compare. Depending on how you provision access to what's called performance history data, then Live Compare will be able to fill in things like how many users run that object, who is the top user, and that can be especially useful if Live Compare finds that there's no test asset for this object. You know, if we know who the top business user is, then maybe that's the person that we need to go to help us fill in that test gap. You can also personalize the impact analysis. I know that almost every SAP customer that I've worked with has, an Excel spreadsheet containing the business critical transaction codes. Load that into Live Compare, and that will be used to adjust its most at risk computation. Live Compare will always favor business critical objects that are impacted when it comes to selecting for the most at risk category. So that's just a nice, easy way to really personalize the analysis. If we move over to the most at risk details, let me just shrink a couple of these. What we're seeing now is answers to the question of why we need to test. So Live Compare has opened up the transports, or it's got access to the objects that are changing, and based on that, it's determined the impact. Now, in the current version of Live Compare, anything that has code can also be rendered as this hyperlink, which would take me to a side-by-side comparison of the change. This is probably more useful from a testing perspective if we're dealing with custom releases. I want to know exactly what development have changed. What we're actually planning on doing in a later release of Live Compare is providing a special flavor of impact analysis for the build team. Because if you're going through 8 years worth of support packs, there may well be fixes you need to apply to your custom code. So there the perspective is a little different. I need to know what custom code should be fixed, not necessarily what custom code needs to be tested. So we're actually going to take this side-by-side code difference and create a brand new app just for the build team. But in terms of illustrating the capabilities, you get the full side-by-side code difference with ABAP syntax highlighting, and there are clearly a very large number of changes as I scroll through that object rather rapidly. Okay. Couple of other sheets that are worth pointing out. Again, if we're dealing with a custom release, we may have created a brand new transaction or program or some other top-level object. Live Compare will report those, not just in the most at risk. So if it's brand new, Live Compare always puts it into the most at risk category, but it also takes those brand new objects and sticks them in the extras tab. I don't have any in this particular release, but rest assured if your development team are building brand new things, they will show up in the extras sheet, helping the test team put particular focus on those, because there may well not be any test cases available to it. Scrolling on, anyone that's using ALM probably familiar with some of these fields. So I've scanned my ALM project database to discover what test assets are available, what kinds of tests. Live Compare will scan automated test scripts as well, looking for those most at-risk tokens, and then it reports where it finds them. Now I know customers use ALM in lots of different ways. Some have just one project with lots of folders for each release. Some have separate projects for each release. Some have projects that they use as sort of the seed for another project. We actually copy the tests for them. So there are many ways in which ALM is used to support the testing phase. Rest assured, LiveCompare has very sophisticated integration with ALM and supports all of those different structures and ways of using it. Okay. I did want to highlight this test data sheet. This is something that's new, so bear with me while I organize that demonstration just for a second. Let me go back to the home page and go into the Impact app. So remember, we were looking at CodeWatch, and I said once you know how to use one app, you know how to use them all, or at least navigate it. You can see that the layout of Impact is the same. If I come into the variant configuration, this actually looks very similar to the CodeWatch app. You know, a number of different ways of identifying what's changed, which systems I want to analyze, and in this case, the standard integration allows me to choose my ALM system that I want to interrogate. Of course, if you're using Microsoft VSTS or some other, maybe even an Excel-based repository of what tests are available, then we simply pop into the designer environment of LiveCompare and change the layout of this app. Okay, what I've done is, just for this demonstration about data impact analysis, which is something that's new, that's coming in a future version of LiveCompare, so I've popped in a few transports which I know change data in my environment. Now, historically, when you change data, LiveCompare would recommend the most at-risk object, but it wouldn't connect that object with what had actually changed at the data level. And that's something that we're working on, so I want to share those results with you now. So we won't pay too much attention to the dashboard, but let me jump to the, I need to close that one. Did I do that? Yeah, there we go. Okay, let me jump back to the test data sheet. So this is new. Well, LiveCompare has determined that these are all of the tables that contain content modifications. And earlier I said that it had to be code in order to get rendered as a hyperlink so that I could see that side-by-side difference. I'm sorry, that's not responding to me clicking, so let me just try that again. With the next version of LiveCompare, we're also doing side-by-side comparisons of data. There we go. So in helping the test team select from potentially hundreds of test data scenarios, LiveCompare provides a side-by-side change of the data. And if LiveCompare detects that it's a configuration table that's being changed, then it outputs what we call this filtered view of the IMG, meaning it will just show me the paths in the IMG that take me to the customizing activities that cause or can change those data. So it provides much more context for the impact analysis. So instead of just being told, go test VA01, now I know what kinds of data scenarios I need to be selecting for, and if I need more information about the IMG configuration areas that lead to those changes, LiveCompare gives it to me. I don't have to do any more work. So that's what's available in impact analysis, and just a sense of some of the things that we're working on right now to really improve the capabilities there. Oops. Here are the results of a customer that used LiveCompare's impact analysis. They had 8 years worth of support packs that amounted to a little over 1 million objects that were being changed, and they experienced 0 production defects through the use of impact analysis, and of course the testing work that they carried out based on its analysis. Perhaps not reflected here, may not be obvious, but one of the things that we've observed is that when people go live with their projects, they often have this hypercare period where we obviously want to jump on any production outage and get it fixed as quickly as possible. But one of the consequences of that hypercare period is that it takes us longer to get back to working on the backlog, right? All of those great new ideas to increase revenue and reduce costs that the business have come up with. One of the things that's implicit in the use of the LiveCompare product is that you don't have that hypercare period, and so you can return to working on the backlog again much faster. You'll see when I represent the last customer case study just how much that can translate in terms of giving time back to the business. All right, the last of the apps today before we get to the questions, just looking at the time, yep, we look okay, is what we can do to support the deployment phase. There we have an application called Release Assurance. The chart is designed to explain the problem, and then I'll show you the solution. Over on the far left, we've got a couple of transports that make up our custom release for this week, and inside those transports, we've got a bunch of objects that we've modified. Now, if we take that release bundle and apply it to production, there is a chance that we could experience import errors or, at worst, production outages. And the reason for that is because maybe the release bundle doesn't include the complete set of changes. And that's really what release assurance is designed to do, is to tell us, is it safe to promote these transports to production? So imagine that this C3 object represents a function, a program for the moment. So we've clearly changed the program, but it turned out that we also changed a function that it depends on. So what LiveCompare will do is it will look down into the implementation, remember those tens of millions of objects that make up our SAP implementations, and it will discover all of the things that that program depends on, which are also different between our QA and production environments, and which are not included in the release transports. Again, promoting that program from QA to production, at best we'll get an import error, at worst we would get a production outage. LiveCompare does the same thing by looking up. So in this case, maybe C3 is a function. We had to change a parent program. LiveCompare has determined that that program exists, that it's different between QA and production, and it's not included in the release transports. So a fairly complex set of analyses that need to go on that have been completely automated in the Release Assurance app. So let me show you that. And let's start the app. Again, just to reinforce it, same layout to the application. This one has perhaps one of the simplest inputs. It just needs three things. It needs my QA environment, it needs the transports that make up the release bundle, and it needs access to our production environment. Once I've run the analysis, you won't be surprised, there's a dashboard that summarizes the information. So sure enough, we analyzed two transports, so I'd expect to see two source transports. They contain 516 objects that have been modified, and then the results of LiveCompare's looking down into the implementation has found 33 additional objects which are different between QA and production, which aren't included in the source transports, and which some number of those source objects depend on. It's also found the transports for us which contain all of those changes, because maybe the right course of action is to add an additional transport, or more than one, to our release bundle. And then over here in the third column you can see very similar results. This time though we've looked up into the implementation of our SAP environment. One of the things that I've experienced with DevOps is this idea that we want to connect the teams together. So inside of Release Assurance we're providing access back to the development team, so we know who was responsible for those transports, both the child and the parent. And because it's LiveCompare, of course, we can do live comparisons. So let's go take a look at one of those programs that LiveCompare found as different. So we're using the same code differencing, so we can sort of easily scroll down as a development team or even as part of the release team to start exploring those changes. Okay. This set of data comes from perhaps one of the longest serving LiveCompare customers, if that's the right way to describe it. Been using LiveCompare for more than a decade and have really embedded it into their DevOps process. They really started out with an emphasis on testing. I think most organizations recognize that that's one of the more expensive aspects when it comes to changing our SAP applications. So if we can put something in place there, we can get really quick win. But since then, it's really permeated across their DevOps process. And I mentioned earlier this idea of giving back to the business, getting rid of the hypercare period, being able to shrink the time it takes to take ideas and turn them into working software in production. And the data that this organization has collected is that per year they've increased their release days by 40%. They've also been able to eliminate these sort of N+1 landscapes. And traditionally that's been quite difficult, because especially if you start sort of onboarding a new SAP support pack at the same time as doing additional development work, you may end up creating a dependency between your new custom work and what SAP have changed in the support pack. Then trying to accelerate a change to production, maybe because of an issue, trying to find those things and unpick them can be challenging when done by hand. And that's an environment where LiveCompare works very well. We saw that with the Impact Analysis app, the ability to do side-by-side comparisons, and also the Release Assurance application. Of course, I'm going to sit here and say I think we do, as IntelliCorp and with our products, a tremendous amount to support the DevOps process. I really do think we're putting that smart analytics in to enable smart DevOps, but we recognize that we don't do testing, we don't do requirements management, we don't do change management, we don't offer anything in the help desk area. So our solution to that is to integrate. And I'm very keen to see our products integrate with third-party solutions. We saw in the apps the ability to integrate with SAP Solution Manager Charm. We also integrate with Revelation Software's RevTrack product. And if there are other ABAP-based change management systems on the market that we can integrate with. We saw the results of doing our interrogation of our test database. In that case, the app was by default wired to support what is now Micro Focus ALM, but you can achieve the same results if you're using Microsoft VSTS or the, I think they're now HCL products, but formerly Rational environments. Or even if you have an Excel spreadsheet that contains your test catalog, we can integrate with that. We've not talked about the support aspect of the DevOps process, but we do integrate with ServiceNow. You can actually kick off an analysis based on help desk tickets that come in. You can have LiveCompare create help desk tickets as well. I know of an organization that runs a regular analysis across their production estate. When LiveCompare detects that there are role and profile anomalies, it basically creates help desk tickets, fills in all of the details so that the team can go resolve that. We integrate with various cloud services. The one I'm highlighting here is the Amazon Web Service S3. We have organizations that want to assimilate data into Amazon cloud services and then analyze it further using open source products like Hadoop. So staging that data in S3 is essential for them to complete that workflow. LiveCompare is a great way to integrate your SAP systems with something like S3. I put the ... there just to reinforce that we're always open to new integration opportunities. And just to get us to questions more quickly, again, we've really focused on custom releases. I've mentioned SAP HANA a little bit with CodeWatch, but if you're doing support packs or enhancement packs or contemplating a suite on HANA or S4HANA transformation, there are other apps that are available inside of LiveCompare to perform complete analyses of those. Consolidations and splits go on. What are we going? Where are the conflicts going to be? What data do we need to ensure is separated? Again, LiveCompare has apps that will support that, all the way through to things like license management and audits as well. So to sum up, you've heard me say the word automate an awful lot, but that's really what we need to do in order to enable a smart DevOps approach to SAP application change, all the way from plan, design, and build through test, deploy, and support. We've seen examples today of LiveCompare and LiveModel and how they help organizations take those ideas and turn them into working software running in production and help them reduce the time to market and the cost to market. So Emma, with that, I think I turn it back to you and we'll field any questions. Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, we've had a couple come through. Thanks, Chris. One of the first ones that came through, a couple of people have asked this as well, is how does LiveCompare relate to the ABAP test cockpit?
Okay, so IntelliCorp is a software partner of SAP. Our products are certified by SAP. And as a consequence of that, we're not permitted to compare our products in terms of feature and function with anything from the SAP portfolio. What we would encourage you to do is to try our products side by side, talk to our customers that have done similar things and make an informed choice. Yes, I showed you the CodeWatch app for doing all of that analytics, but we certainly have customers that are already using the SAP tools. They've actually wired LiveCompare into that environment to supplement the reporting and the presentation of the results. So for that organization, the SAP tool was the right choice because they were already invested in it. They're not going to throw that away and start using CodeWatch. But what they recognized in LiveCompare was a way to present the results in a more engaging and meaningful way. For other organizations, they've selected to use CodeWatch. But we're not permitted to provide feature-by-feature comparisons with SAP products.
Thanks, Chris. Another question that we had come through is, when is the data change analysis expected to be released for use by customers?
Okay, so the target GA will be around the Sapphire timeframe, which I think is early June. So expect the actual generally available release sometime in June. Customers that actually have a test environment separate to their production live compare will probably be looking to spin up beta installations of that in late April, early May.
Thanks, Chris. So we've got a couple more questions here. For release assurance, will this catch low-level data dictionary objects?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So if for example, you had you've got a function module that, or a table that you've created where you've modified a data element or a domain, and that those two things are not included in the release bundle, Live Compare will find it because it looks down and explores those dependency chains. It will then do the comparison of all of those data dictionary objects to find out if they're different between your QA and production environment. And if they are different and are not included in the release transports, they'll show up in that middle column we saw where it said, how many child transports are missing and how many child objects are missing. And then you'll be able to click through the hyperlink to actually get a side-by-side comparison showing you, how is this domain or data element or other data dictionary object different between QA and production. So yeah, it's not just repository objects, complete support for data dictionary as well.
Thanks, Chris. Another question we have, does Live Compare require services?
I mean, it's a product, so you need to be trained on its use. I would say that, again, the vast majority of people work with the reports, so for them the training is probably a WebEx and a few hours. For the people that are actually going to run the analysis as consumers, so working with that apps UI that I showed you, our standard training, which covers what we recommend as the first phase for Smart DevOps, which is CodeWatch, Impact, and Release Assurance, standard training for that is a day. If you then want to progress and actually start building your own apps with Live Compare, which generally is a very small number of people in any organization, the training there could be more extensive, sorry, maybe a couple of days.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that, if you work with a services partner and you have Live Compare, of course, that team is free to use the information reports and run the product as well.
Okay, thanks, Chris. We have so many questions coming through, and I know that we're over time. I'll just cover one more. So will this pick up differences in code if moving from an S/4HANA system to an older ECC system, where there may be differences in configuration that might be moved?
Okay, I'll make it better the question. So it sounds like you've got an S/4HANA and you kind of want to retrofit a change back to an ECC. I'm hoping I'm understanding the context for that correctly. Yes, Live Compare can compare and contrast S/4HANA, Suite on HANA with classic ECC environments as well. I'm hoping I'm answering the question. If not, I guess we'll leave the chat open for a little bit. Please elaborate, and I'll definitely follow up. I'm not sure I've properly understood that one.
No, that's fine. That's everything today. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody, for joining. If you have any more questions, then please, contact us. You can follow up with additional resources on the blog, LinkedIn, our iShare community as well on the website, and we will send out the recording afterwards via email as well. So if you have any more questions or something that you didn't think of on the call, then please let us know. Thanks very much, Chris.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, Emma.
Thank you. Bye.